Welcome to City Talks, where we discuss the big issues facing UK cities and the latest thinking on urban policy with expert guests. I'm your host, Andrew Carter from the think tank Centre for Cities. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to City Talks, where we discuss the big issues facing British cities. I am not Andrew Carter. Your usual host is off on holiday. I'm Anthony Breach, Director of Policy and Research at Centre for Cities, and making my podcast host debut. Today I'm joined by my colleagues Oscar Selby, Analyst here at the Centre.
Hello.
And Jess Tulasiewicz, Head of Public Affairs and Policy.
Good to be here, Anne.
Welcome both. So today we're discussing D-Day, Devolution Day. So we've had rumours all week that today we would get a big announcement on fiscal devolution. And what we got, in fact, was a 7-page document from the Cabinet that has quite a few things in it, wouldn't you say?
Definitely.
So it's really all quite exciting. Maybe even too much stuff in this document. So I think what we're going to do today is we're going to go through this 5 key takeaways that we've gathered from the document and give some reflections on what it means for the government, what it means for the future of the devolution agenda, and where we can expect change to come most quickly and most substantially. So let's start off. I think we heard it was going to be mostly about the fiscal side. Oscar, start us off. What does it say about fiscal devolution?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Anne. So here at Centre for Cities, fiscal devolution is something we're really passionate about. We think is really important. It's sort of the last piece of the puzzle in really delivering devolution fully. And today's announcement has been really encouraging. So there's been a series of things in relation to fiscal devolution. The first is that by April 2027, there's been a commitment to increase the amount of business rates that goes to both local authorities and mayors. So business rates are the non-domestic property tax in this country. Currently, an average of about 50% of business rates goes to local authorities. The plan is to increase this, and only a few mayors have access to business rates. And the plan is to give all mayors access to business rates. In addition to this, there's also a commitment to follow through on the visitor levy and give all mayors the power to implement the visitor levy. Whether all mayors will do that is another question, but all mayors will have the power to do that.
And non-mayoral areas.
And non-mayoral areas as well. Rolling out visitor levy to try and provide sort of fiscal devolution beyond just the mayors, you're right. The real big ticket item, though, the big step in fiscal devolution is this idea of income tax sharing. So income tax sharing is not something that has happened at the local level in the UK for a very long time, if ever. And so there's a massive step in trying to empower places and move power outside of Whitehall and into the rest of the country.
Yeah, it's pretty common in other parts of certainly Europe. Places like Poland, places like Switzerland, they all have income tax sharing mechanisms of their own, and they all have some way of dealing with the equalization problems as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. So one of these questions that often comes up when you look at income tax sharing is that different parts of the country have different tax bases. Basically, some places generate much more income tax revenue than others. So the same percentage of income tax in one part of the country, say London, would generate much more money than an equivalent share of income tax in somewhere where income is slightly lower, say maybe the Northeast. But this is also the case in lots of other parts of the world that do this kind of income tax sharing. And they remedy this by providing a floor, by ensuring that every part of the country gets a minimum amount of income tax revenue. But they don't necessarily impose a ceiling, and they allow places to have some level of difference so that if they grow their economy, if they increase their income tax base, they can increase revenues and they are guaranteed that benefit.
Yeah. And so kind of that's a big difference from our equalization system that works within the business rate system, where we have a system of resets where it all gets clawed back every few years, right?
Exactly, yeah. So within the business rate system as it is now, there is this top up and tariff system where every year places that have a higher tax base or larger tax base pay into the system, places that have a weaker tax base receive from the system. And that probably makes sense. But the problem is after a 6-year period or so, any growth in business rates that has been generated overall gets clawed back by the government and redistributed, which means that there's no certainty that if you do grow your economy, you will see the benefits. And so there's no incentive, or there's a much weaker incentive. Also means you can't do things like tax increment finance, which is what we're really excited about, which is this idea that if you grow your tax base by delivering a new infrastructure project, you can use that increased tax revenue that comes from the project to pay for the initial costs of it.
Yeah.
When you have resets, that's not possible.
Yeah. And so I think this kind of reset, kind of equalization challenge, that's going to be probably a bigger issue to deal with than the concept or the possibility of equalization, which I think is still where quite a bit of the debate is stuck. So moving on now, kind of onto sort of lots of the other different powers that were available or have been announced in this document. Jess, take us through. What are some of the kind of the biggest things that we've seen that are coming through in the document released today?
I mean, I think the absolute first point of order is the operating principle that they've set out in the document of devolving by default. So secretaries of state will need to justify why they're holding onto power at the centre rather than devolving it down to the local level. It's quite a change from the right to request process where the combined authorities are the one who had to request what they wanted, moving to this default system.
Yeah, so it's a very different burden of proof, right?
Definitely, exactly. And but yeah, quite a lot announced today as well. If we take, for example, the skills space, mayors are going to have control of the budgets for 16 to 19 education. Been announced vocational education for ages of 14 plus, and also the devolving of employment support. So those are things that various mayors have called for several years now, including Burnham himself when he was in Manchester. Transport space, for example, we've seen a commitment to deeper devolution for Great British Railways, so mayors will be able to partner much stronger on this. In the housing space, mayors will be equipped to support the building of council homes, so this will include greater devolution of the social and affordable homes programme. And then something else I found interesting as well was the Good Growth Fund being extended to all mayors. So again, working with something that Burnham did in Greater Manchester and rolling that out on the national level.
Yeah, it's a very vivid example of the Manchesterism, right? Taking the experiences and indeed some of the problems which Burnham encountered in Greater Manchester and trying to take the model that was developed there and make it national as well. I think it's also interesting as well that the two things you mentioned there are kind of dealing with departments. I think it's fair to say historically have not been as keen on aspects of the devolution agenda as some of the other departments that have existed within Whitehall. I think the fact that these are sort of clearly top priorities for Burnham, indicates that there's a real prioritization of focus and energy and some sense of unfinished business from when he was Metro Mayor.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. So skills has been something that's definitely had less attention in the last few years compared to planning, for example, or transport when it comes to devolving powers. So yeah, I think you can see his frustrations that he experienced as mayor, really him now really trying to do something about it at the national level and bringing other mayors along with him who've had similar experiences.
Yeah, great. Are there any other things that come to your mind, Oscar, that you think are sort of really pop out to you from the document?
Yeah, I just think there's this point that I think is really important, which is that a lot of this stuff, or some of this stuff at least, exists already in some mayoralties, but doesn't in others. And there's kind of a principle that's been proven already. So in Greater London, for example, there is already direct control over the social and affordable homes programme. This has been relatively successful in allowing the mayor to support and fund social housing within the capital. And because the principle's been proven, it provides the validation that allows you to say, okay, now we can give this to the mayors across the country and to strategic authorities without mayors as well, potentially. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well. These aren't all necessarily new, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. That it's, I think it really proves and demonstrates this model of, proving things in the leading mayoral big cities and then trying to extend that model out to other parts of the country. But there's also some new stuff as well that seems to be, currently it's maybe kind of smuggled in a paragraph or two, but there's really quite a lot in there that has big implications for the agenda.
Yeah, definitely been the case. We see this within transport itself by looking at things like the devolution of the Transport and Works Powers Act, which basically allows local authorities, mayors, to provide the legal ability for places to deliver new transport infrastructure, which previously or currently right now is held by central government. So devolving that gives mayors the power to do that. And there's a series of different planning powers that have been activated as well. There's an eagerness to activate the Planning and Infrastructure Act, which allows mayors to deliver things like mayoral development orders, which provide planning certainty in different parts of their mayoralty, where they can provide rules that can then be abided by developers, and developers can therefore be guaranteed planning permission. In addition to this, there's also been an eagerness to reform local statistics, which we think would improve the quality of local statistics and allow us to evaluate local policy making a little bit better.
Yeah, I think one other thing, I think it's quite interesting as well how there's a shout out to local authorities in the document as well. So it's announced that the government will take forward a programme of reform to support the financial sustainability of local authorities, as well as local authorities are still crucial to the devolution as well, and many sit as constituent authorities under the mayor at the moment as well. And then I thought also interesting, it said that there'll be a clear role for MPs in local accountability, and they'll also be working with the mayors as well. So I think he's trying to bring different tiers of government along on the devolution journey too.
Yeah, I think we'll see how that works out. We're getting the MPs more involved in mayoral government. I've been at least on quite nicely to the kind of third item that we're discussing, which is this question of progress and pace, right? And that we've been working on this for a long time now, right? It's almost 10 years since Andy Burnham was elected as Mayor of Greater Manchester. We've seen changes over that time, but we've also seen periods of less rapid change. It definitely does seem in this document that the government wants to inject a bit of energy and a bit of pace into this agenda. Jess, just run us through kind of what is the government's ambition on kind of a geographic and a structured scale for the government in this area?
Yeah, you're absolutely right to bring that up. And the ambition in here is very clear and yes, spreading wide as well. So we've seen mentions of speaking to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland about devolving potentially mayors or strategic authorities in those regions as well. But then, yeah, on a more broad point for all of England as well, it says there'll be strategic authorities governing every single area. The preference is to have mayors at the head of these, so mayoral strategic authorities. But it's not going to be enforced on places, but places with mayors will get more powers. Also, very interesting that a few more MSAs have become established. So in that list included the West of England and Cambridge and Peterborough. And there was also quite a big emphasis on the capacity building at the local level as well, which is something that's come up quite a few times in conversations we've had as well.
Yeah, and I think it's that kind of offer which the government seems to be making with mayors, one that's so good that it can't possibly be refused, I think seems to be the tone of it. Obviously, when the devolution bill was passed and became an act, the Lords were quite insistent that no place could be forced to accept a mayor. So it seems that, maybe this is in part the government sort of bowing in reflection to that kind of legislative reality. But I think it's a kind of an interesting example of how, there was clearly this kind of agenda which Burnham has and which he's been working on developing for some time, but there is nevertheless going to be resistance at the central level, not just from Whitehall departments, but from parts of our legislature and from our political system as well. So kind of, I sense the timelines and the pace of how this is all implemented is going to be important to make sure that this actually becomes a reality and is felt by people on the ground, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why he's trying to make sure these institutions can deliver at that pace. And I think the capacity point builds into that quite nicely as well.
For sure. So another sort of related, the opposite variety of complaint, which I think we've been seeing a little bit today, is this idea that there's not enough detail in this document. I think our perspective is there's really quite a bit of detail in this. But I think it's fair to say that there's lots in it, but each one is not necessarily fleshed out. We don't have lots of numbers and statistics in the document as of yet. Oscar, what are your kind of thoughts on what that means and what that maybe indicates about government thinking?
Yeah, well, potentially that's the case. But I think the reason why there's not much detail is because this is a signalling document that is going to be fleshed out properly in a white paper that will come alongside the autumn budget and the fiscal devolution roadmap that will be published as well. So it's something to reveal the direction of government. I think it's also important to emphasize that not having loads of top-down detail is probably a good thing for the devolution agenda. The idea is that devolution should be delivered and should be designed by the mayors, by the local authorities, by the local governments that are going to receive benefit from it. So making sure that it's not Whitehall that are designing all of these policies and imposing them on local government is important for this to actually be real devolution that generates real autonomy.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, Jess, do you have any kind of further thoughts on the government's balance between sort of detail and scope means for the future of the agenda?
I mean, top line, I would say the ceiling has definitely been raised. I mean, just reflecting on my time here at Sem Cities, I started around the time of the Trailblazer deal, so that was a big deal when it happened. And then obviously we had the Devolution Act as well. So those have been some big landmark things that have happened, but this has definitely raised the ceiling to absolutely new level. I mean, in terms of the detail of this document, I don't remember a time when I've seen so many things within 7 pages coming out of government. But I think, yeah, Oscar's absolutely right. The detail will be for the combined authorities and the mayors to decide on what they want to do with these powers. Each place will want to deliver the powers to their regions in different ways. And that's the point of the devolution agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, even if there's bits of the the document that listeners might disagree with, I think hopefully we can all agree that the scale of ambition here is refreshing after many years of government paralysis in not necessarily this area, but certainly other areas of public policy. It's felt that maybe British government and politics has run out of ideas. Today, we've seen that that is not true. There's still plenty of ideas and people who are trying to develop them and implement them. All right, so just to get to the final stage as we wrap up, obviously, our job as a think tank, we're meant to produce ideas and meant to push out the debate and help government think about how to solve some of these problems. Where would we say that government could go further, Oscar?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And this isn't to say that these aren't big steps. It's just that we think there are complementary things that can also be done alongside this. And one of those in the fiscal devolution space is looking beyond just business rates and income tax and considering devolving corporation tax as well. So this is something that is common in other parts of the world. In Germany in particular, they devolve corporation tax to the local level. And this can be really beneficial in generating a really strong growth incentive that encourages local authorities, local policymakers to be really in tune and sensitive to the needs of the local business base in their area. That ensures that they make policies that are attuned to their needs and support their growth, which ultimately supports employment, supports access to jobs, and improves living standards.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially if we're thinking about this challenge of how do we get everyone within a city region to benefit from the growth that takes place within a city centre, having a tax that is literally taxing the profits and success that is occurring in those locations and ensuring that it's spread more widely across the entire city region is kind of an open and shut answer to that political question, I think, from our perspective. So one of the things we've seen in response to these kind of announcements on income tax sharing has been from some of the more kind of mayors of the right, so Ben Houchen and Luke Campbell, that with their new fiscal freedoms, they would like to offer an income tax rebate to their residents. I think it's some of the response we've seen back to that has been some pushback, that there's been some resistance to this idea. Jess, what would you say kind of our position is? Like, how should the government think about these calls from these mayors for more flexibility in how they use their new income tax sharing powers?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point to raise, Anne, and it's been interesting to see how the debate's gone on today online as well. But yeah, I think we would say that's definitely against the spirit of devolution, and it should be for these areas to decide what they want to do with these new powers as well. And we shouldn't already be putting rails around what they can and can't do.
Yeah, I think certainly being open-minded as to the possibility for places to think about, actually the priority for residents in my area is a tax cut. It's a bit more money in their pocket, more so than it is, some additional projects and additional spending. That is indeed for voters in each place to, hold their mayors accountable. Like maybe their mayors have got it wrong, and actually the voters would love more projects and investment in public services.
We've seen this with the discourse around the visitor levy as well, right? So Ben Houchen has come out and said that he's not going to implement the visitor levy if he gets the power. I think that's completely within his right? He's the locally elected politician. He's being held accountable by his constituents, and he clearly thinks that the view of his constituents is that they don't need more taxes. That's his area's position, and he should be able to represent them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be an interesting thing for British politics to try and digest as the devolution agenda advances. It's not just going to be local politicians increasing taxes to pay for more stuff. We're going to see some of the more local politicians trying to cut taxes so that their residents have more money in their pockets. It's going to set up an interesting political dynamic. All right, so there's obviously plenty to come. It's a very exciting period for devolution. We will be very busy, not least Oscar and Jess here, in working towards this agenda and trying to help the government implement it. We have a new briefing out on mayoral powers that sets the current state of play for what the mayors are currently able to do and what they will soon be able to do. Before that, last month, we had a briefing out on fiscal devolution about what the mayor's new powers on funding should be, including income and corporation tax. And we've got more detail coming down the track soon on corporation tax and other modelling for fiscal devolution. You can follow along with the research agenda that we're implementing on our website, social media, and the podcast. I'd like to thank both of my guests for another excellent episode. And until next time, take care and stay safe. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of City Talks, brought to you by the Centre for Cities. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Podbean by searching Centre for Cities. Please rate and subscribe if you liked what you heard. You can follow the Centre on Twitter at Centre for Cities, all one word, or on LinkedIn for the latest on what the Centre is up to. To hear about all our latest reports and briefings and upcoming events, sign up to our fortnightly newsletter via our website, centreforcities.org. If you have any comments on the episode or suggestions for topics we should cover, we'd love to hear from you. Do tweet us or send us an email to info@centreforcities.org.